So it's been a while since the last time I posted a video. A large part of it is this, as you can see here. I've been busy working on it. Haven't been recording like I should have, I'll be honest. Part of it is I'm not really sure how to go about recording a lot of what I'm doing here. But I figured worst comes to worst, I put out something that is a little less exciting, but it does at least chronicle my journey with this. So with that said, I should introduce my newest project, which is also, I guess, my oldest project, which is a 1953 Willis Overland Jeep station wagon. No, that's a lot to say, so normally just keep it at Willis Wagon or even just Wagon. I got this back in February actually, and have been slowly but surely tearing it down so that way I can put it back together. This, as far as I can tell, it has basically all of the original parts except for two seats that I'm missing. Specifically, I'm missing the driver's side rear and the mother's-in-law seat, which, while an extremely rare option, as far as I can tell, this Jeep was optioned with it because it's still got the brackets for it and everything. Not really sure if I'm going to try and track one down. They're really hard to find and they're expensive if you do find them, so I don't really think it's going to be worth it. But anyway, so the previous owner had the stock engine, the stock transmission and transfer case all pulled out of it because he was working on restoring it. In fact, you can see over here, I've got the stock engine on an engine stand, along with a whole bunch of other mess. As you can see though, the stock engine is a not so spicy 4-cylinder engine. The actual specific model is the F134 Hurricane, which actually is the same engine model as what my 1958 CJ5 that we call Lemon Lime has. Great little engine for a lighter vehicle. So Lemon Lime does great with it, especially because of the fact that Lemon Lime is 2,300 pounds and small enough that I'm not really comfortable going more than about 55 miles an hour anyway, even if it had the power to do so. So a little engine that can't push faster than 55 miles an hour is perfect for that. However, for this, which weighs about 1,000 to 2,000 pounds more, depending on which source you're looking at, I think Willis claimed that they were about 3,500 pounds for shipping weight. I've seen some people claim that they're as heavy as 4,500 pounds. I don't have any idea at the moment. I haven't put it on a scale yet. But any way you look at it, it's a lot heavier. It's also a lot longer, and a big thing is because of its longer wheelbase, its overall larger size, I do feel a little more comfortable with at least this platform going closer to highway speeds. And I would like to use it for that because I'm not particularly fond of trailering vehicles that I'm going to take off-roading. Part of the experience for me is being able to just drive the whole rig up and take it as is on the trails. I find something fun about being able to travel long distance both on and off-road with the vehicles that I build. And so that's kind of the goal for the wagon, is something that can do that. 72 horsepower is not going to cut it, especially when you're looking at the fact that stock, most of these wagons and the CJ5s that have the same engine were optioned with, or were not optioned, but they were shipped with 5.38 to 1 axle gear ratio, which is, and I have confirmed that that's what this wagon has in the axles. It's ridiculously low. To put it in context, in a modern Jeep like my 2024 Wrangler, to justify that kind of axle gearing, you need to have something like 42-inch tires or bigger. It's just ridiculously low. And Yes, it helps get some of that get up and go for the 72 horsepower in the Hurricane, which was useful back in the day when they didn't have speed limits that were quite as high, but it very much limits your top speed, very much limits how fast you can go. So part of rectifying that is I've purchased a small block Chevy engine that will go in the stock engine's place. So as you can see, I've got it here on my little engine cradle. My personal goal was to put kind of the lowest power small block Chevy that I could get into it for as cheap as I possibly could. The idea being that I'm not currently replacing the stock axles on the engine, and the stock axles are not the strongest. For context, I've got a Dana 25 up front and a Dana 44 in the rear. I know a lot of people will hear Dana 44 and think, oh, that's actually a pretty strong axle. Not in these. Back when these were made, it was a two-piece, I think, flanged axle, something like that. The end result is that they're a relatively small axle, relatively low strength, because they weren't designed for big engines, heavy duty power, all those kinds of things. I'm going to be pushing it to the limits with the 33-inch tires that I've got on it. So I'm going to be very careful with how I use throttle, very careful with how I drive it for the time being. But part of helping that, my idea was that I wanted to get, like I said, lowest power small block Chevy that I could. Chevy 305 fits the bill across the board for that. It is a small block Chevy, so at some point when I do upgrade the axles, I can upgrade the engine and not have to redo a ton of work. The 305 is generally known as being the crappier little brother of the 350 small block Chevy. And as a result of that, I think they put out somewhere in the low hundreds for horsepower and low 200s for torque. I'd have to look that up. I'll probably put it in the base of it or on the bottom of the screen. But yeah, the biggest thing though is I got this engine for $300. Basically complete. It needed a new distributor, which I was going to have to replace anyway because the stock distributors in these engines is generally a little bit too tall to clear the firewall on wagons and pickups of this vintage anyway. So I replaced it with an HEI distributor right off the bat. The carburetor didn't necessarily need replaced, but it needed rebuilt. It had been sitting for a long time. Modern ethanol gas eats away at all the innards of these carburetors if you let them sit for too long. So it was shot, and it was a Quadrajet. They're not a horrible carburetor. I'm just not super familiar with how to fix them. Figured the rebuild kits for them were $400 to $600 depending on where you looked and how complete it was. At the end of the day, it was cheaper for me to just buy a cheap Edelbrock carburetor that I can just drop on top of it and go with that. Let's see what else. So like I said, I do have the stock transmission, which is a T90 transmission. I think a T90A specifically. I'd have to look at the stamping on it, which is a 3-speed manual transmission. First gear is not synchronized, which means you have to either rev match or be going extremely slow in order to be able to shift into first. It's a decent transmission for the stock drivetrain. However, putting V8 power through them is marginal at best. Some people have good luck with them. Some people blow them up right out the gate somewhere. Most people are somewhere in between. But ultimately, I am not a huge fan of the T90 in general. The gearing is not super good for the kind of driving I want to do, the kind of off-roading that I want to do. So I didn't want to keep that. The stock Spicer 18 transfer case. I absolutely love that case. Had it in lemon lime for for a few years. Tons of fun. I love having the twin stick. Love being able to, and love the whine of it. It's just a very nostalgic, era-specific feel to it that I absolutely love. So I did actually want to keep that. However, the one I've got is leaking everywhere, needed a rebuild, been sitting for a long time. And I wanted specifically to have an overdrive for it. So many people who are familiar with this vintage of Willis and Kaiser Jeeps will have heard of a man who calls himself Herm the Overdrive Guy. He owns a business out in Washington State. Absolutely the expert of overdrives that are attached to Dana 18, Spicer 18 transfer cases, as well as a whole lot of other drivetrain products for Jeeps of this vintage. So I reached out to him and found out that he offers Dana 18 transfer cases that have been rebuilt and had a Terra Low gear set put in them. The Terra Low means that the low range in the transfer case drops from 2.46 to 1 to 3.15 to 1, which is a pretty significant drop. I essentially couldn't resist. So I ended up purchasing an SM420 transmission to replace the T90, a rebuilt Dana 18 with the Terra Low gears, and one of his overdrive units that he builds in-house with a 30% overdrive. So the end result, based on my math, is that low range is going to have a 119 to 1 crawl ratio between the axle gear ratio, low range in the transfer case, and the 7 to 1 gear ratio for first gear in the SM420. Absolutely ridiculous. For context, my Rubicon that I've recently purchased has, I think it's a 77 to 1 low range. I'll correct that in post if I'm wrong. And you can get a manual transmission Rubicon with, I think it's an 84 to 1 crawl ratio is the lowest you can get on that. I think the Broncos are a little bit lower because they've got that super low crawl gear that you can get in the manual transmission. I'm not 100% sure on that. I'll correct that in post. But regardless, ridiculously overkill for this setup. And it is going to be neat and all for what I'm doing. I think it's going to be wildly overkill for this particular setup because, as you can see, I'm only putting it on 33s, which is probably taller than I need anyway. And they're not going to be, like, I'm not going to be doing crazy off-roading with it. I'm going to be doing a decent amount of off-roading, but not like highly technical crawling or anything like that. I just want it to be capable enough for me to get to neat camping spots, things like that. So it's definitely overkill to have 119 to 1. I am eventually going to re-gear the axles to about 410 to 1. I guess technically not re-gear. When I replace the axles, I'm going to make sure they're about 410 versus the 538. Reason for that, aside from the fact that I don't need 119 to 1 crawl ratio, spinning highway speeds in with 5.38 to 1 axles is ridiculous. Ridiculous amount of speed coming through both the transfer case and the axles. They're not designed for that. So as is, I'm probably gonna have to not do a lot of highway driving. I'm gonna have to keep a close eye on fluid levels in both the transfer case and the axles. Make sure that nothing boils, things like that. To try and remove that worry is part of why I'll be getting, I guess, higher gears or lower numerical gears. But yeah, let's see what else. Oh, so as you can see, I am only part of the way through replacing glass on this. Much of the glass that came in the wagon was broken. In fact, pretty much every panel except for this door, the rear tailgate panel or the rear hatch panels, and then the windshield panels was broken or shot potentially. So I'm in the midst of replacing all of that glass. I think it looks pretty nice to have solid glass in it, but I don't see why someone would disagree, but there's always naysayers no matter what you do. So let's see. I guess I will show over here. I've got, aside from the engine, I've got, like I mentioned, the transmission, transfer case, and overdrive. The overdrive and transmission both came with shifters, which is great. As I'm thinking about it, it probably would have been a good idea to purchase a new set of shifters for the Dana 18 so it all match, or at least be similarly clean. But to be honest, I don't care a whole lot, and I've got a set of shifters that I can snag. Let's see. So we have the shifters there that came with it. These are the stock seats from the wagon. As you can see, they are in horrendous condition, at least in the for the most part. I am not at all wanting to sit on those. They've been sitting for, I want to say 40-ish years, and all numbers of rodents have got at them. Not particularly interested in that, so I'm going to get those reupholstered at some point. In the meantime, I'm probably just going to stick some bucket seats up front. You can see over here, there is the T90 transmission under some stuff. I've got the hood here, and I've got down there, I don't know if you can quite see it, just barely see it. I've got the stock transfer case, some other odds and ends that came from this. But yeah, so you can see the new glass. The interior is a mess from what I've been doing. What I'm currently working on, or have been working on, is rewiring the whole thing. You can see a little bit in here. I'll pull. You can see a little bit in here where you have some of the stock wiring right there. That wiring is pretty representative of the stock wiring throughout the Jeep. Basically, cloth covered, decades old, and a lot of it has been chewed through. To try and avoid dealing with electrical gremlins, I got a painless performance wiring harness, and I'm just rewiring the whole shebang, and that should help solve that issue before it becomes an issue. So you can see back here, we've got some of the wiring projects. I had to replace the plastic covers in the taillights here. It looks a lot better, not busted out. And interestingly enough, both the transmission that I've got and the wiring harness I've got have wiring for reverse lights. So what I'm kind of considering, because these are just a little screw-in reflector, what I'm kind of considering is seeing if I can't find or make an LED light that is about that same size, screws into that same spot to make reverse lights, just for kind of kicks and giggles. But yeah, let's see, what else? You can see the headliner bows are kind of messed up. I'm probably going to have to cut those out, to be honest. I don't know if there's any real way for me to salvage them. There could be someone better at this than I might be able to, but realistically, I don't see a whole lot of hope for that. So let's see what else. So you can come over here. As you can see, the 33s are a little tight. I am fairly confident they're not going to rub, just except for maybe on bumps on various roads. But what I've been able to determine based off of using my jack is that it will flex up into the wheel well if it's just one tire. So we'll see what ends up happening. I'm hoping it doesn't rub, otherwise I might have to do a taller lift than what I was expecting. Over here, you can see I have removed, there was a stock radio here. It was, in fact, actually the stock radio is right there. Massive thing, but it was very much dead, and I needed to be able to reach in to be able to see and access wiring in the dash. One of my first actual modifications here was this turn signal switch. It did not have turn signals at all from the factory. And then also I did an electric wiper conversion, which you can see the switch right here for that. Actually in the stock spot, looks pretty good in my opinion. So the stock Wagon did not have turn signals at all. Part of being from 1953, I guess. So I needed to add those. So you can see as well, one of my other modifications is these pedals here. So the stock pedals push through the floor. In fact, you can see one of them here. I still haven't quite disconnected the clutch pedal. But yeah, the stock pedals push through the floor versus hanging from the firewall and rotating in, like more modern ones do. Couple disadvantages to that system. First off, it's a very specific linkage for the clutch. I know there's some people who have managed to adapt an SM420 clutch setup to the stock linkage for these pedals. It is a very involved process, and honestly, I'm not super fond of linkages anyway. I've had the clutch linkage on Lemon Lime cause issues a few times on weird flexes when I'm on trails, and it makes it so I can't actually do anything with the clutch. Not super big on it. Decided I wanted to do a hydraulic setup instead. In terms of simplicity, it's so much easier to deal with a hydraulic clutch than a mechanical clutch, just in terms of adaptation. Rather than having to figure out how I'm going to get the linkage to set up, I just have to run a hydraulic line to the clutch slave cylinder from the clutch master cylinder. Additionally, the stock brake master cylinder is, you can just barely see it right here on the frame. Because of where it sits on the frame there, as you can see, the exhaust runs not too very far away from that. And for instance, in Lemon Lime, the engine actually sits right next to it. My experience with that location has been that the brake fluid can actually boil just from the engine heat, not from any actual use of the brakes. Not exactly my favorite. So to try and avoid that, and also to simplify my modernization of the brake system, I'm again going to a firewall mount system for it. It's going to end up working significantly better than what they used stock. As you can see, I've got the whole wiring mess over here. I've not wired anything on the front end, just because it is very probable that the way I'm going to put the engine and transmission, transfer case, all that stuff back in is as a single unit. And rather than trying to do some wonky setup where I have to like bring it in at an angle and flatten it out to come in through here, I am going to pull the grill off and hopefully come as nearly level as I can from the front, so I don't have to lift it super high and be dangerous, be more dangerous than I need to be. Let's see. So that's why I haven't wired anything yet there. Additionally, I also want to wait until the engine's actually in the engine compartment to determine fitment for things. So I don't exactly want to, I don't want to put that all together until I know where everything's going to sit. Let's see, what else is going on? Oh, so I did, however, replace both the headlights and the parking lights there. The headlights needed to be replaced because they're sealed beam. So when the original electrical system for this Jeep is a 6-volt system, which is fairly antiquated. You can still find bolts and things for it, but it's harder. Batteries are a little more expensive in my experience. You're not going to get nearly as much power. Ultimately, it was just easier to not mess with it, especially since the alternator on the 305 is a 12 volt. Just converting to 12 volt makes everything simpler, especially since like I said, I'm rewiring the whole system anyway. So I needed new bulbs for everything. The stock headlights are sealed beam, so I had to replace the whole headlight round glass there. Eventually I'd like to upgrade maybe to halogens or even the LED kit that Holley makes, but for now this will work. I also had to replace the parking light bulbs, not just with 12 volt bulbs, but with 2 filament bulbs. So the stock parking lights, because this didn't have turn signals, were just single filament, so they just turn on when you had the parking lights on. The conversion that I did required that, or if I wanted to have turn signals, I needed to have dual filament bulbs if I also wanted to have parking lights at the same time. So what I was able to do was just get essentially the sockets from a later model Wagon that did have turn signals and put those sockets in. Now I've got dual filament bulbs, they're 12 volt and all is well. So you can see here I've got the new wiper motor. I actually think I broke the stock vacuum motor a little bit on accident. I'm not terribly upset about that. It is a bit of a bummer that it broke off. I'm trying to remember what happened exactly. I think I was trying to test fit the stock motor and I accidentally bumped it coming down and it broke off. It is a bummer that I broke stock parts, but also the vacuum motors on these were never great, even when they're well functioning, so it's not a terrible loss, it's just a little bit of a bummer. So I've got, I added mirrors. Those are part of my street legality project here. But yeah, so let me think, what else? I want to say that's it for what I've done thus far. Today's project, though, is I am going to come underneath the Jeep and I am going to replace the stock gas tank. So you can see it's a little beat up and bashed. I'm not 100% sure if it's in good shape or not, but to be honest, I am not terribly worried about that either way. It's not, so it's been sitting for decades and I don't want to deal with the corrosion on that, so I figured it was just going to be easier long term if I replaced it. So I got actually a polycarbonate gas tank to try and replace that with. It's in this box here. So that should prevent any fuel system woes, especially as I run completely new fuel lines. So, all right. Based on my recording time here, it looks like I have actually run a lot longer than I expected, just explaining the project. So I am probably going to show the actual, actual installation of the new tank in another video.